صليت على إبراهيم وعلى آل إبراهيم إنك حميد مجيد. اللهم بارك على محمد وعلى آل محمد كما باركت على إبراهيم وعلى آل إبراهيم إنك حميد مجيد. رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي. Alhamdulillah, we begin with the praise of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and by sending the best of salutations, peace and blessings upon his last and final messenger, Muhammadur Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Tonight being an odd night, and furthermore it being a Friday night in the very last Ashara. So just imagine the weight and the value and the worth of tonight in the sight of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Many of the ulama are inclined towards the opinion that if an odd night happens to fall within the last Ashara during the month of Ramadan, and that night is a Friday night, the chances, the likelihood of it being Laylatul Qadr are very high. So hopefully may Allah allow us to make the best of tonight and the remaining odd nights as well, inshallah, or in general the rest of the days and the nights of the month of Ramadan. The ayah that I wanted to speak about today was the verse mentioned by Maulana Usman Ahsan rahmatullah alayhi within that book that we've been covering all along. Ala bi dhikrillahi tatma'innul qulub. Just to give you a little bit of background as to our current standing and where we stand in today's society and where we're headed, or where the general masses or the public is headed. If you look to see with a keen eye, or step back for a moment and ponder and wonder what's really happening, what's going on. One common theme that you'd come to know or come across is as if all the powers around us are taking us further from Rabbul Alameen subhanahu wa ta'ala and his remembrance. Everything around us, almost, nearly everything around us, is constantly taking and pulling us away from the remembrance of Allah, thus making us fall into the state of ghafla, heedlessness. And not just becoming heedless of the true purpose of life, but furthermore no longer realizing the actual purpose of life and more or less just going with the flow. Take any example. Any example. Alhamdulillah, we're fortunate enough to be in the house of Allah in the month of Ramadan. Fortunate enough to be offering Salat al-Taraweeh. Fortunate enough to be speaking about the kalam of Allah, about thinking of him, remembering him, engaging in his adhkar, speaking about Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam, and just being in the hospitality of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Why and how? We are in his house. And subhanAllah, when we are in the house of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, by default we are his guests and he is the host. Being in the masjid, we don't understand how of a valuable blessing that is. Literally, we can count, I can count in front of me how many people are sitting in front of me on my fingertips. Is this the entire Muslim community in the area? Of course not. Is the Muslim community attending elsewhere? Maybe. Yes, we hope so, inshallah. But even then, there's a large number of the population that isn't attending the house of Allah within the month of Ramadan. And if you come across a person who may be of that category, you ask him, any reason? Why not? The entire month has come to a pass and I haven't seen you in the masjid. And he would probably say, I've just been so caught up with work, so caught up in life and personal matters, and just been going through so much. And that's nearly the case of, if not every person, every other person. And can you blame them? Allah knows best. But nonetheless, the circumstances around us aren't really in our favor either. Truly, they're not really in our favor. SubhanAllah, in trying to live a practical life today is basically trying to swim against the tide. Do you know how difficult that would be? Just on a lighter note, so that you understand this to on a better ground. Those of us who think we know how to swim, we may know how to swim in a pool, in our local pool or in an apartment building pool or within the home. But being able to swim in a pool is, you cannot compare those skills of swimming in a pool compared to being put into a river or going into an ocean and trying to swim in the open water. I've tried it and I thought I was a swimmer. I thought I knew how to swim until I jumped in and realized, oh no, what did I get myself into? The current and the waves and the tides and just, the mass body of water. Like, I thought this was my local pool. And subhanAllah, that's just on a normal condition, on normal circumstances. Now imagine trying to swim against the tide. Nearly impossible. Nearly impossible. In the same manner and way, today's society, it's taking us away from the remembrance of Allah. In all of its, subhanAllah, fancy and effort. In all of its fancy and effort. And it's become so difficult for us to be able to just live a normal practicing life as a Muslim. Why? Because everything around us, from the moment we awaken from our beds to the very last and final moment we close our eyes and try to get some rest, it's all about dunya. It's all about commitment. It's all about work. It's all about, aspirations. It's all about my dreams and ambitions and goals and what is it that I have to do tomorrow? What is it that I need to get done today? Who do I have to see tomorrow? And our minds and our life, subhanAllah, it's constantly rotating around that one circle. Now ask yourself, how much of space or time are you allocating for the remembrance of Allah in your busy day and schedule and routine? And we're talking about an average Muslim here. We're not talking about someone who's really close to the deen of Allah, or who's gone really far away from the deen of Allah. Just an average Muslim. You'd be surprised that, maybe the average Muslim isn't even offering their 5 daily salah. And what's going on? If you look at the bottom, if you truly look at the crux of the entire issue, it's the state of ghafla. We have forgotten the actual point and purpose of life, and after having forgotten that, we continue to chase our dreams and ambitions, and in the process we're sacrificing and just completely sidelining anything which relates to our deen. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala makes it clear. And again, shaitan deceives us, thinking and making us assume, for example, a general example which is given, that if you had enough wealth today, you'd be in a better position to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tomorrow. That's the common understanding. Like, if you were well off today financially, you'd be in a far better position to be in the masjid, in the house of Allah tomorrow, or even later in the evening, for as long as you knew there weren't any financial constraints or bills to pay or ends to meet. This is your assumption, and this is only wishful thinking. This is only wishful thinking. I often say, make dua for wealth, which is of khair and barakah, not in the sense of abundance, because oftentimes wealth will bring its own headaches along with itself, its own issues and problems along with itself. So subhanAllah, we're thinking, if I am wealthy enough today, I would have a peace of mind tomorrow, I'd be able to free myself for the worship of Allah tomorrow. That's not the case. If you cannot dedicate some time during today in your current circumstances for the sake of Allah, what makes you think you'll be able to do it tomorrow? Nearly impossible. Nearly impossible. And the very bottom line is what? You're hoping to find, a moment of peace or contentment in life through which you can finally at last step back and live your life as a Muslim. Chances of that happening, very unlikely. Allah states that within the Quran, look, that contentment, that pleasure in life, if you're really truly looking for it, it's only found in the remembrance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. أَلَا بِذِكْرِ اللَّهِ تَطْمَئِنُّ الْقُلُوبُ. That's the bottom line. That's all there is to it. So for us to be able to set aside some time from today onwards in making sure that we're not heedless about our obligations towards Rabbul Alameen subhanahu wa ta'ala, we have all of our daily salah in place, intact, on time, we're fulfilling the very basics of our deen, and then some, inshallah, based on how close we want to come to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And once we start doing that, then without a doubt, inshallah, that gap and that void we feel in our life will be filled through the remembrance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Just earlier I was thinking, it was just a thought, All of us are carrying a burden, right? In some shape or form, whether it's, mental toll, whether it's, spiritual, subhanallah, lack of guilt, or, spiritual guilt that we feel that I'm not doing enough, or whether it's anything else, but we feel burdened by something. And it's strange, generally speaking, if you were carrying a heavy object as you're standing, it would become more difficult for you to hold that burden while standing, right? And if you choose to sit down with that burden, you're still carrying it, but it would lessen, right or wrong? Because now you're sitting on the ground, and whatever you're carrying, it's heavy, but at least you're not in that standing position and holding and carrying. If you truly want to remove all the burdens from yourself, whichever shape or form or type or kind of a burden you may have, fall into sujood and everything will be removed. Think about it. How is it? What power lies in a sajda that when I'm in sujood, there is no burden on me? Isn't that the case? I hope so. And in the hadith of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the closest we can get to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala whilst we are alive is in the state of prostration, is in the state of a sujood, a sajda. That is the closest we can get to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala whilst we're still alive. And how true is it? The people who have been tied down and constrained with worldly matters and just have been so fed up with the world in itself, they themselves, the moment they fall into sujood, the peace they find in that moment and in that position is priceless. It cannot be compared. There's the promise of Allah. You want contentment? You want peace? You want to feel good? The only way for you to achieve and attain that is through the remembrance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And remembrance here is general. We as Muslims, making sure that we do the best that we can in fulfilling our fara'id. And then on top of it, go out of your way in trying to fulfill some nawafil. Because the hadith of Rasulullah is clear that we continue to draw closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala through our optional and voluntary prayers, not through fara'id. Fara'id is the basic minimum. Who's content with the minimum wage? Nobody. We need to really step up and take it to the level of nawafil, so that Allah Azza wa Jal, as He mentions, you continue to get closer to me through your optional deeds and actions until I come to love you. And that's what we want, the love of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And what better way to achieve and attain and hope for that than in the month of Ramadan? So on a practical level, the few days we have left in the month of Ramadan, make sure to offer your nawafil prayer after every salah. Don't let them go by. You must pray your additional nawafil salah after each salah during the month of Ramadan, as the reward is multiplied immensely, to so much so it nearly reaches the level of reward, reaches the level of fard. Imagine the level of fard, how far that goes. And then the opposite is true as well. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions, وَمَنْ أَعْرَضَ عَنْ ذِكْرِي فَإِنَّ لَهُ مَعِيشَةً ضَنْكَ وَنَحْشُرُهُ يَوْمَ الْقِيَامَةِ أَعْمَى. Anyone who refrains, who neglects, who stays away, who refuses to remember me and neglects my signs and my blessings, then in return I will make life miserable for them, or for him, or for her. And this is true. Subhanallah. Think of it this way. There's so much to say, but inshallah, and within a minute or two. Don't you think we're living in an age of medicine? Think about it. It seems as if we live in an age where we're taught that all of our worries, sorrows, pains can be resolved through a pill. You have a headache? Here's a pill. Not feeling so well? Here's a pill. Anxious? Depressed? Here's a pill. What's wrong? Here's a pill. Can't sleep? Here's a pill. Restless? Here's a pill. Not so happy in life? Here's a pill. People who go to the level of, assuming of suicide? Here's a pill. As if we're taught that there is a pill for everything. Right or wrong? That's true. That's so true. I mean, the pharmaceutical companies couldn't be alive in a better time than the 21st century. Seriously. Now, well, do you think Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala designed the world so that pills could be sold and people could profit out of the sickness and illnesses of the rest of humanity through pills? Allah is just. Allah is just. All of our problems and worries and anxieties can be resolved if we simply replace this pill with the dhikr of Allah. It's a matter of conviction and commitment, and really, of course, I'm not denying that we shouldn't adopt medicine to feel better and to treat our sicknesses. No, point is, there should be a fine balance. There should be a fine balance. Imagine if the promise of Allah is there that you want contentment and pleasure and satisfaction in life, come closer to Him and you'll be pleased, you'll be content. You'll live a prosperous and a happy life. And of course, you're going to become sick and ill, and then you resort to medicine. Ibrahim ﷺ mentioned, وَإِذَا مَرِضْتُ فَهُوَ يَشْفِينِ. If the prophets, the Anbiya ﷺ would fall ill and become sick, who are we? Of course, we're going to go through that stage as well. But do not make a simple remedy into the very cure for everything as well, especially if it's something founded within this dunya. But for us, alhamdulillah, spiritually speaking, we need to resort to the dhikr of Allah in every and all aspect. If we don't, then yes, our cabinets will be more filled with different prescriptions, one for each thing, just to get by the day and get by the night. I mean, may Allah protect us and preserve us and keep us in His safety and protection, and only allow for us to take medicine when it's a must. Otherwise, alhamdulillah, live a happy life, hurt no one, don't get hurt along the way, and just live as a Muslim, and inshallah die as a Muslim. Allah states, you want contentment? His dhikr. And if you go the other way around, then dhanka, meaning a miserable life awaits. It's clear. We just ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to open our eyes, and furthermore, just to be able to practice our faith the way it is. And if we're able to do that, inshallah, there is so much ease that awaits us. And even if there's some difficulty or pain that comes our way, even within the pain you'll find contentment. Even within the pain you'll find contentment. SubhanAllah, that's a level of its own, to a degree that some of the ulama mention, even Maulana Usman mentions in his book, through some poetry, that a person who engrosses himself within the remembrance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the near words of the poem that a person who so deeply goes into the remembrance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he becomes oblivion to his surroundings, regardless of how tough and difficult times around him may be. It doesn't bother him, it doesn't affect him. To a degree, to him, nothing else matters. For as long as I'm in peace internally, the world can be as chaotic outside as it wants to be. For as long as I'm in peace internally, that's all that matters. And how do you achieve that? Through the dhikr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant us strength in His deen. ربنا تقبل منا إنك أنت السميع العليم وتب علينا إنك أنت التواب الرحيم وصلى الله تبارك وتعالى على خير خلق محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين.